is Waffles, and I'm a government whistleblower turned political commentator, and here are the top economic news highlights for the past 24 hours. Today is December 2nd, 2025. It is 10:25 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. Today, technically, because I'll be posting this tomorrow, yesterday, the stock markets closed with the S&P 500 up 0.2%, the Dow Jones Industrial Average up 0.4%, and the Nasdaq Composite up 0.6%. The Institute for Supply Management, ISM, released its latest manufacturing PMI report on Monday, December 1st, for the month of November. Manufacturing PMI, the index fell to 48.2%, down from 48.7% in October, indicating that the manufacturing sector has been contracting for the ninth consecutive month. A reading below 50 indicates contraction. New orders, the index for new orders sagged for the third straight month, suggesting a marked weakening demand of growth. Employment, the employment index shrank at a faster pace in October, adding evidence of a cooling labor market. Trade impact survey respondents explicitly linked the softer international orders, reduced margins, and ongoing difficulty in long-term sourcing decisions to tariffs and economic policy uncertainty. Many noted the policy's failure to incentivize reshoring and overseas sourcing remains cheaper even with tariffs. Inflationary pressure, the prices index increased slightly to 58.5%, suggesting that while overall price increases have moderated from recent highs, costs remain elevated for manufacturers, often due to tariffs on key raw materials like steel and aluminum. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, released its latest economic outlook on Tuesday, December 2nd, 2025. The global growth forecast, the OECD upgraded its outlook, now forecasting the world economy will grow 3.2% this year, up from its previous June forecast of 2.9%. Resilience despite trade wars, the report noted that the world economy has proven surprisingly durable despite the ongoing U.S. trade wars and tariffs. Future slowdown, the organization expects global growth to slow to 2.9% next year in 2026. Markets showed some consolidation and cautious risk-taking following a strong previous month and ahead of a week of delayed economic data releases. Stock market, U.S. stocks generally ended higher on Tuesday, led by a rebound in the tech sector. Treasury yields, U.S. Treasury yields saw mixed but mostly steady movement. The 10-year Treasury yield nudged slightly up 4.1% from 4.09%, while the 30-year Treasury rate remains stable at 4.74%. These moves reflect investor anticipation of the upcoming Federal Reserve meeting, where a rate cut is widely expected to stimulate the economy at the expense of whatever dumbasses are stupid enough to think that that's the time to take out loans. You will be the ones paying for economic stimulation. DOE commits $800 million for small modular reactor and SMR, small modular reactor deployment. The U.S. Department of Energy, DOE, announced the selection of two projects at the Tennessee Valley Authority, TVA, and Holtec Government Services to receive up to $800 million in federal cost-shared funding. This funding is a crucial step for the early development of advanced light water SMRs, small modular reactors, in Tennessee and Michigan. This massive federal commitment is intended to strengthen domestic nuclear supply chains, reinforce the electric grid against rising demands, especially from AI data centers, and advance the administration's energy dominance agenda. Not sure how you're going to be very dominant in energy if you're not going to support green technology. I mean, technically, if this is water power, then it would be considered green tech, but it says nuclear supply chain. So I don't fucking know what the hell this is. Yeah, energy dominance my ass if you got to rely on fossil fuels and can't do things like solar and wind power. This signals a major public investment in nuclear energy to meet future electricity demands. So he's dumping money into nuclear by the river. By the river. Tennessee. AI data centers drive massive U.S. power demand forecasts, infrastructure and tech. A new report from Bloomberg, BNEF sharply raised its forecast for U.S. data center power demand, projecting it could hit 106 gigawatts by 2035, a 36% increase from the previous forecast. This upward revision is driven by a wave of deals and speculative projects seeking to secure power for artificial intelligence infrastructure. This creates immediate economic risk as utility sectors in regions like Texas, ERCOT, and PJM are already struggling to keep pace with the struggling load growth, potentially leading to great capacity bottlenecks, higher energy prices, and delays for other infrastructure projects. Costco files lawsuit against the Trump administration over the tariffs. Warehouse retail giant Costco Wholesale, the COST, filed a lawsuit against U.S. Customs and Border Protection and the Trump administration in the Court of International Trade. Costco is seeking a refund of tariffs paid on imports over the last several months, contingent on the Supreme Court finding the administration's broad tariff authority as unconstitutional. This move signals that large consumer-facing companies are escalating their legal efforts to fight the economic burden of the ongoing trade war, which ultimately impacts consumer pricing. Costco says, give us our fucking money back. Give us back the money that you stole. India-U.S. trade uncertainty stalls $2 billion in apparel orders. Negotiations for approximately $2 billion worth of U.S. summer apparel orders from Indian manufacturers have stalled due to extreme uncertainty regarding the final tariff rates that will apply under a potential new India-U.S. trade deal. This trade uncertainty is causing U.S. importers to shift orders to competing nations like Bangladesh, Vietnam, and China, which face lower tariffs. This highlights how prolonged geopolitical trade negotiations create immediate, measurable financial damage to supply chains and cause permanent market share losses for U.S. trading partners, which can then affect sourcing flexibility and consumer costs for the U.S. market. Federal Reserve ends quantitative tightening monetary policy and liquidity. The Federal Reserve officially ended its quantitative tightening policy, QT policy, on December 1st, 2025, halting the process of shrinking its balance sheet by allowing bonds to mature without replacement. This cessation comes amid concerns that bank reserves have dropped too low, raising the risk of another liquidity crunch similar to the repo market seizure in 2019. By ending QT, the Fed is essentially pausing its effort to withdraw liquidity from the financial system, acting preemptively to stabilize funding markets, which can be interpreted as a major supportive monetary move, separate from the widely expected rate cuts. OECD upgrades U.S. growth outlook even as tariff pressures persist. The OECD's December 2025 economic outlook released today raised its 2025 growth forecast for the U.S. to 2% up from prior projections thanks to sustained AI investment, fiscal support, and expectations of later rate cuts. However, the OECD also warned that ongoing U.S. tariffs remain a headwind. Many firms front-loaded imports earlier this year, so lingering effects will surface once those inventories run down. Globally, the body expects trade growth to slow markedly from 4.2% in 2025 to about 2.3% in 2026, raising risks of supply chain disruption and import price volatility that could feed into U.S. inflation or consumer costs. Costco suing the U.S. government over emergency power tariffs. We already went over this. Let's just check it to see if there's anything interesting added in here. Not really. Nothing I feel like is worth reporting on right now. I think it's pretty clear cut. Donald Trump's, not even supposed to be issuing these tariffs under IEEPA. I'm pretty sure that there was a ruling against that. And now Costco's like, give us our fucking money back. Because they're having to pay extra themselves. And also, it passes the cost on to consumers and is just generally bad for business. Manufacturing slump deepens as tariff headwinds bite. A new report shows U.S. manufacturing activity weakened further in November, reflecting both domestic demand softness and trade policy headwinds associated with the tariffs. With manufacturing under pressure, economists warn that longer-run investment, job stability, and supply chain resilience could suffer, especially in sectors reliant on imported inputs or export markets. Federal Reserve Fed uncertainty increases as markets rethink rate cuts. Markets reacted nervously after recent data and trade tensions. Rising treasury yields and weaker manufacturing pushed down non-yielding assets like gold. Per one report, U.S. gold futures dropped as investors awaited key inflation and jobs data ahead of next week's Fed meeting. Meanwhile, the likelihood of another Fed rate cut, previously seen as nearly certain, has been pared back slightly. The shift underscores how economic and trade policy uncertainty is complicating the Fed's path forward. Compounding that, today the White House indicated it will announce its pick for the next Fed chair early next year, adding political uncertainty atop economic volatility. Plans to roll back fuel economy standards, implications for auto, energy, and consumers. In a major regulatory shift, the administration is set to propose significantly weakening fuel economy standards for 2022 to 2031 model year cars and trucks. The move would make it easier for automakers to sell gas-powered vehicles. This rollback may reduce incentives for fuel-efficient or electric vehicles, slow industry transition, and potentially raise long-term costs for consumers, fuel maintenance, increase emissions, and create regulatory uncertainty in the auto sector. In the summary, the upgraded, and we're nowhere near done. We're like a third of the way through the report. The upgraded growth forecast by OECD appears encouraging, but most of the upside depends on continued AI investment and favorable fiscal and monetary conditions. Tariff-linked supply chain stress and weakening manufacturing paint a more fragile underlying economy. The legal challenge by Costco and similar suits signals a structural risk if courts find the tariff authority unlawful. Firms may seek large-scale refunds, potentially destabilizing import-heavy sectors and causing a scramble to reprice goods. I'm pretty sure that the tariffs under IEEPA were already found illegal. I don't know if there's appeals and stuff going on with that right now. But yeah, there's that. Manufacturing headwinds plus trade uncertainty may depress investment, especially in sectors dependent on global supply chains. That could slow job growth and output in industrial regions, raising economic inequality and regional distress. Regulatory rollbacks, auto fuel standards suggest the administration is doubling down on a short-term growth and business-friendly agenda, but at potential long-term costs to consumers, public health, and climate goals. Monetary policy uncertainty as the Fed weighs next moves, plus trade policy swings could feed financial volatility, squeeze household budgets, and stoke inflationary risk if imported goods costs rise. Federal Reserve Bank of Boston warnings that global economic fragmentation may drive renewed U.S. inflation and volatility. In remarks to a conference, Boston Fed President Susan Collins said the shift away from an integrated global economy marked by trade tensions, supply chain disruptions, and protectionist policies could push up borrowing costs in the United States and complicate the central bank's dual mandate of price stability and employment. She cautioned that less global integration may lead to more volatile business cycles and unpredictable inflation, potentially undermining investment, growth, and long-term economic resilience. Record holiday season online spending. A bunch of dumbasses went and gave Jeff Bezos all their money because they have more of a desire to have shit that is made out of plastic than they do to survive and have any sort of future worth living in. People wasted money on Jeff Bezos for Black Friday because they have no survival instincts. Growing pressure on U.S. supply chains, trade policy, and monetary policy from fragmented global trade dynamics. The fragmentation of global trade and supply chains, noted by the Boston Fed, stands to amplify the effects of already high import tariffs and trade restrictions, potentially raising costs for businesses and consumers and putting pressure on supply of goods and inputs that in turn could complicate efforts by the central bank to manage inflation and growth, especially if shortages or supply side cost shocks coincide with tight labor and credit conditions. Consumer spending remains just enough to keep growth alive, creating fragile equilibrium. While retail sector data and holiday sales show pockets of strong demand, underlying consumer confidence remains soft, especially among lower-income households, raising questions about how sustainable the current demand is if price pressures or job market softness deepen. This dynamic suggests the current consumption-driven growth could be fragile. Some economists warn that shifts in fiscal policy or renewed inflation could easily tip the balance, potentially triggering a slowdown or demand crunch in 2026. Risk of a renewed inflation surprise plus tighter credit plus vulnerable consumers scenario in 2026. With global supply chains under strain, rising borrowing costs, and the risk of volatile financial cycles as flagged by the Boston Fed, the U.S. economy appears exposed to a confluence of inflation pressure, cost pull shocks, and consumer stress, a scenario that could weigh heavily on growth, wages, and living standards in the coming year. The tension between high consumer spending and now holiday boom and structural risks 2026 may present a tougher path if inflation remains elevated and wages don't keep up. Household budgets could come under real pressure, especially those already using credit or buy now, pay later plans to make ends meet. And remember, kids, the stock market is not the economy. Just because the S&P 500 or Dow Jones might be performing does not mean that wages are growing, jobs are secure, inflation is under control, or that people are thriving. This concludes today's economic report. I'm going to go now. I'll see you later. Goodbye.
So the Olympics is great. And Johnny, for the others, the World Cup, Johnny is the head of it. We had our top people, Wasserman. They all came in on the Olympics, and then I saw Johnny. And we got the World Cup, too. And, it's only because they rigged the election that I'll be your president representing you there. I got both of them. I got the Olympics, and I got the World Cup. And I said, it's too bad. One was in 2026 and the other was in 2028. And I said, I won't be there. I won't be your president. But then they rigged the election and now we won. So I'm going to be your president for the Olympics and for the World Cup. So Johnny, thank you for the World Cup. And everybody, thank you for the Olympics. We're going to have a great time.
Hey guys, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and comment on my videos. And also, don't forget to check out my shop where you could get this awesome Real Patriots Punch Nazis t-shirt. America, fuck yeah! And if you go to the link tree in my bio on most platforms, it's got links to everything, all of my stuff. You can find my shop there. I'm on eBay. You can also get this cool Exterminate MAGA sticker, cause MAGA's fucking cockroaches, and fuck MAGA, abolish MAGA, fuck you MAGA.